Welcome to Keen on Green with Evan Rigsby, the podcast that dives deep into the world of environmental consulting from a multitude of perspectives. Join your host, Evan Rigsby, as he explores the intricate challenges and innovative solutions within the environmental sector.
Happy New Year, everybody, and it is 2025, and it is a very special episode today. Today I have on John Haas, and this is episode 6 of Keen on Green. John is a very diverse individual, and he is the sales and business development professional at Product Recovery Management, also known as PRM. And John just comes from a whole diverse set of experiences. He's worked, all over the industry. He's even worked on the consulting side as well. He's worked with remediation techniques and different technologies. He's worked with landfills and thermal projects. The list goes on. The thing I love about John, he's going to share a little bit about, his experiences today, is John understands the technical side of the business, but he also understands the sales and business development side and working with clients. So, John, without further ado, thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me, Evan. I really, really appreciate it. Looking forward to a great discussion.
And just 5 minutes ago, I learned he was a hockey fan.
There you go.
All right, so John, a big thing, that we do on the podcast here is, as we were talking, we share career experiences, and
Sure.
Everybody came into the industry, for a different reason, and kind of going for yourself and going back to when you started. What got you interested in all this? What got you interested in environmental?
So really two things, Evan. And I was a senior at Babson College in 1986, long time ago, right? And at the time, still now, but at the time, Babson was really internationally known for entrepreneurial studies, the entrepreneurial program, right? So that's kind of setting the stage a little bit. So a family friend at the time, I was a senior at Babson, family friend was the general manager of a remediation equipment division of a larger company that specialized in emergency response and drilling. So he was talking to me and said, John, what are you thinking now? You're in your senior year. It's time for the real world. What are you thinking about doing? And I'm doing this interview, that interview. Had an interview with Frito-Lay to go to Dallas at their corporate headquarters, which was pretty coveted position at Babson every year. And he said, well, I've got an idea for you. You know what I do? I said, yeah. I said, well, I'm looking to expand and grow my division. I've known you your whole life. What do you think about getting involved in the environmental industry? And I said, well, tell me about it. Now, you got to remember, this is in 1986, right? So the industry was not necessarily in its infancy, but it was pretty darn close to being in its infancy. So he talked to me about it. I did a little bit of research and said, this is really interesting. There's a lot of contaminated sites in our country. What a great idea to be able to build equipment that contractors use at sites to clean up the environment. Mm-hmm. So I embarked down that road with him. He hired me and really became my initial mentor in the industry. In parallel with that, I was friendly with another student at Babson, my senior year, who at Babson at the time, they held a collegiate competition whereby if you really wanted to start your own business in the real world, you presented a business plan to a board of entrepreneurs and executives, and whoever won the competition got some money to start their business. So I was friendly with this other student, and he presented his business plan to the board and the executives of starting a company, starting a business that would test underground storage tanks for leaks. Kind of interesting, right? Kind of the same thing, gas station, underground storage tanks, the old tanks were steel, they leaked. He won the competition, got $5,000 in seed money, and back then, $5,000 was a lot of money in the mid-'80s, so he won the competition, got $5,000 in seed money to start his business testing underground storage tanks. Mm-hmm. And he's still in business today doing a lot of other different things because that part of the industry has gone away. But, so those two things coupled together, I said, that might be a really good fit for me. And here we are nearly 40 years later, still doing the same thing.
I love it. I
Yeah.
think you hit a very interesting point. You came in really when at the advent of a lot of the development of like remediation and contaminated things.
Yeah.
We have all different type of listeners on the podcast. We have people who are 40 years in the industry. We have people that are, like you said, when you were at Babson, in college right now, trying to make that decision
Yeah.
to come into the industry.
Yep.
Where have you seen, and I'm just curious from your perspective, where have you seen the market mature since then or develop, or, how have you kind of seen it change over the years?
Because when I got into the industry in the mid '80s, there were no real true regulations. I mean, I've got some horror stories, not horror stories, but interesting stories that I won't share on this podcast about, you install a bunch of equipment on a site and it's supposed to be doing its thing,
Yeah.
but it's only working if you turn on the electricity. Because there were no regulations, gas station owners, as an example, say, I'm not going to run that equipment. I'm not going to pay for that electricity. They just shut off the meter and wouldn't run the equipment.
Oh, God.
But you look at that, the mid '80s to where we are now, it's an entirely different ballgame. I mean, back as an example, in the mid '80s, BTEX, gasoline compounds, particularly benzene, carcinogenic. That was the big thing that everybody was talking about. And here we are, nearly 40 years later. Nobody talks about benzene or BTEX anymore. Now it's PFAS, right? Yeah. So I just look at the industry and say, in the mid '80s, BTEX and treating benzene was this big exotic animal, this sexy animal that needed to be treated, and now nobody even talks about it. Been there, done that for 40 years. Now PFAS is the big animal that everyone wants to go after.
Well, I think it's interesting because, I know both of us were at Battelle back in June in Colorado. And, I remember seeing PFAS everywhere. And, it's crazy. And all that. I think one of the other interesting things you mentioned is, especially on the consulting side, there's a lot of folks who are very technically savvy, getting involved with projects, getting involved with, all that. I think what's very interesting about, your career path, you did have that entrepreneurial backbone. You did have, from a very early age, getting to interact with clients and build those relationships. And, it's an experience that not everyone gets. And, so from your perspective, what was that like, building those relationships, fostering those relationships, talking with strangers, what was that like for you?
That can be hard, I mean, even today at my age and experiences, I'll go to a conference and it's still a little unnerving to talk to a stranger. It's human nature. It's not, for most people, it's not that easy. But if you open up to somebody and you find some commonality or some common ground to use as an icebreaker, it really just paves the way for an easy conversation. As an example, I was sitting at an airport several years ago, and this is just nothing to do with business, just an example of how it can be easy to just start a conversation and who knows where it will lead, right? So I'm sitting at an airport, waiting for my flight, go to grab a bite to eat and a beer. So I'm sitting there at the bar having a beer and some late lunch, and I've got a Fairfield University sweater on. Our daughter's a junior at Fairfield. So I'm sitting down and these two women, probably maybe mid-40s, look over at me and they're saying, "You go to Fairfield?" I said, "No, my daughter," I think she was a freshman at the time, "my daughter's a freshman there." I said, "Oh my God." One of the women says, "Oh, I graduated from Fairfield." The other one says, "Oh, my niece graduated from Fairfield and my nephew was there right now." So point being, that wasn't a business conversation per se, but if you can find a common denominator, if you will, when you're approaching somebody, you're looking to talk to them, a lot of times that can just make the conversation go so much easier.
Oh, absolutely. And I think off of that, earlier in the conversation, you had talked about mentors. And I think, regardless of any career, you need to talk with mentors. You need to reach out. You need people who have lived it. What was that like for you, throughout your career? And, and your experience with mentors?
It's interesting. Mentors and coaches are essential for success, right? So I joined Maple Leaf Environmental Equipment, now rebranded several years ago into Newterra. So I walk in, and they were going after me really, really heavy, very aggressively. So I joined the team. Based in Ontario, I worked in my remote office in Massachusetts. So I go there for the first really internal sales meeting, and they had a sales coach at the time. And I thought I knew everything. And let me tell you, Evan, after about 30 to 45 minutes with this guy, I knew nothing. He was like an 80-year-old retiree who was a CEO, CFO, stepped away for a year or two, and then decided, I want to help people. So him and one of his sons started a business coaching business, and Newterra hired him. And I remember him saying so vividly, he said, don't you think for 1 minute that Tom Brady doesn't need a coach? The greatest quarterback in the history of football, he has a coach, he has a mentor, he has this, because as human beings, nobody's perfect, right? So having a mentor to guide you, coach you, help you, support you, it's absolutely critical for success, 100%.
Off of that, and and you're right. I think with everybody, there's always an aspect. What can I get better at? What can I get it more into? Whatever. What were some of the challenges with your career? Like, what are things that you had to really, work on to get to where you are today?
So one interesting story, and it's a great lesson, I think, in what you should do and what you should not do. So several years ago, I was at the old Bisco Environmental, who's since closed the doors, but I was there as in sales and project management for 12 or 13 years. And at this time of this story, we were heavily involved in the ExxonMobil remediation equipment vendor program. For many years running, we were the leading vendor. So we were contacted by a program manager at ExxonMobil who said, I'd like you to provide me a proposal to design and build a mobile trailer system that one of my contractors is going to take to sites for emergency response applications and quick short pilot studies. I said, okay. He sent me some information. We gave him a cost. He signed off on it. And we design and build this system in a mobile portable trailer, axle, tires, wheels, the whole 9 yards. So we're done with the system. His contractor, who at the time was in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, comes up to our shop here in Massachusetts, does some witness testing, loves what he sees, says, all right, get it down to my shop next week. We bring it down to his shop, and he had told me, he said, once I get it, John, I got to hook it up to one of my trucks, go to the local weigh station so I can get weight tickets, because I've got to haul it all over the place. I need to have those tickets so I can present them. So, all right. So he goes to the weigh station, and he calls me. It's like, John, we got a problem. I said, all right, Tom, what's the problem? And he says, trailer's overweight. I said, what do you mean? He said, it exceeds the GVWR, the gross vehicle weight rating, of what's stamped on the axle, on the tongue, and the tongue weight is too heavy. I've got a big F-350 and it pulled down the hitch. I said, ugh, all right, give me an hour. I talked to some folks that I worked with at Bisco, came up with a game plan. I called him back. I said, Tom, I got a game plan, but before I tell you what we want to do, what do you think we should do? He said, John, it's kind of simple. A little bit challenging, but when I boil it all down, it's easy. You got to call so-and-so at ExxonMobil, who we did the job with, under contract with. You got to tell them you made a mistake. And that's what it was, Evan. We made a mistake. We were off in our engineering calculations. And as a result, the trailer could not be towed safely and properly. So I called program manager at ExxonMobil, told him what had happened. And he said, well, what are you going to do, John? And I said, it's simple. We're going to hire a trucker. We're going to get a truck down to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We're going to put it on a flatbed. We're going to bring it back to our shop. So he brought this trailer back to our shop in Massachusetts, gutted it, removed some of the equipment around, changed some of the equipment so it still met the performance requirements. Then we put it on our own, we bought our own scale, weighed it, it was fine. The point is that when all this was going down, one of our competitors had a problem with one of their systems. It's a different set of problems, but nonetheless problems. And instead of taking ownership and responsibility, they were pointing fingers and laying blame on others. So the fact that we got this trailer back at our shop, did all this work on our own dime, our own nickel, didn't charge anybody for it, that action in and of itself, we got so much more business from this program manager at ExxonMobil, and the positive repercussions were unbelievable. Point being, if you make it, we're all human beings, right? If you make a mistake, take ownership, take responsibility. We're all human beings and we make mistakes. What defines you, in my opinion, in this business or in any business, is how you react and respond to those mistakes. Hold yourselves accountable and take ownership and make things right.
I love that, and I want to touch on that, and you hit home for me. I mean, especially, and you don't have to be a sales professional to take this advice. But I think the big thing here is like you see a lot of stuff where you hear about ghosting, you hear about lying, you hear
Right.
about, and I've always believed everything comes back. It
Oh,
always,
100%.
and and stuff. And to your point, when you were in that moment, I'm sure the last thing you wanted to do was pick up that phone call and talk with them. And
Oh, 100%.
you know,
And the guy, the program manager at ExxonMobil, super nice guy,
yeah,
but he could be gruff. He could be right to the point, dropping F-bombs and everything else. But I led into that conversation with the fact that we knew we made a mistake. We didn't realize it at the time. We now realize it. We have a plan. And that lead in, if you will, then he said, "Okay, John, what's your plan?"
Maybe you can also touch upon this too. And off of that, I think, there's a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of courses, how to sell, how to build relationships. But I've always believed at the end of the day, you just got to find your own way. It's how everybody's different. You got to find your own rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
You got to find what works for you. But people work with people they like. And,
Right.
And stuff. What was that like developing, your style, or like even the style you have now? Like, how do you approach that? Do you have like a business first approach, people first approach? I mean, how do you go about that?
Really, what I've always done, Evan, is I say I take a soft approach. I guess the best way I can describe it is I don't sell anything. I look to solve people's problems. And the best way you can do that is ask questions, stop, wait for the response. Too many people will go into a meeting or a phone call, and as my former business sales coach would say, shut up and throw up. Or they'd ask a question and just keep going and going and going without giving the individual time to answer the darn question, right? So what's critical is ask a question, wait for the answer. And by doing that, you learn what somebody's problems are, whether it be, hey, John, I'll give you a classic example. I bought a remediation system from so-and-so several years ago. I've got some problems with it. Can you help me? Mm-hmm. Sure. What problems are you having? Right? Wait for the response. Okay, this isn't working. Have you checked this? So, I don't really try to sell anybody anything. I like to ask questions, listen for the responses, and really uncover that, as I call it, their pain. What is painful to them in that particular situation, and taking that information to try to solve the problem without selling anything.
So off of that, and off of your career, like, any memorable project or projects that really come to mind where you were really, like you're talking about, you're walking a client through, your hand holding, you're guiding them through that process. But any projects that were like, really fun for you or just like really memorable that kind of come to the top of your head?
Yeah, two projects in particular, Evan. Nothing really to do with what we were just talking about a moment ago,
Yeah.
but you asked me two memorable or notable projects.
Yeah.
So a few months ago, Hurricane Helene hammered, just trash Western North Carolina, right? So PRM's headquarters is outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, about 20, 30 minutes outside of Raleigh. So we got involved and designed and fabricated a skid-mounted water treatment system for the University of North Carolina at Asheville to provide clean drinking water to get students back to school. So we built a modular system on skids, bag filtration, liquid phase carbon, sand filtration, reverse osmosis, all integrated controls, automatically controlled, and when it was fully commissioned and started up, there was potable drinking water, students could get back to school.
Wow.
That's the more recent one. A little prior to that, when I was at TerraTherm, we were a thermal remediation contractor. We got involved with a ex situ above ground thermal remediation project at Da Nang Airport in Vietnam. So roughly 49 years after the Vietnam War, in conjunction with USAID, which is the U.S. Agency of International Development, in conjunction with the Vietnamese Ministry of Government, TerraTherm designed, constructed, and operated an above-ground ex situ treatment system that removed dioxins from soil. So Agent Orange was used to defoliate the jungles in Vietnam during the war, and as a consequence, chemicals of Agent Orange, primarily dioxins, contaminated thousands and thousands of acres of property at the airport. So we got involved at TerraTherm and we built on-site treatment cells where we excavated the contaminated soil, placed it in treatment cells, utilized thermal remediation to raise the temperature of the soil, extracted the dioxin and treated it. We met the cleanup standards for the soil. The soil was then pulled out of the treatment cells and then used as clean fill for redevelopment and construction at the airport. So, I look at those two projects providing clean drinking water to students at UNC Asheville, and then several years prior, thermal remediation at Da Nang Airport in Vietnam, quite frankly, to clean up a mess that we made in the first place.
It's so interesting. And so, what you're saying, especially with the airport, these chemicals were just sitting for years.
Yeah.
And, oh my gosh. And, and stuff. I think you talked about PFAS a little bit. For those who don't know, about your firm and so forth, can you talk a little bit about, what you guys do at PRM, but also, going forward and just your expertise, where do you see the industry heading? Do you really see it on that PFAS path? Do you see other areas of, interest? Where do you see things playing out?
Yeah, so one of the things about PRM is we're really, really diverse. So much so that sometimes I forget to wrap my head around all that we do. We really do a lot and offer a lot. So the company was founded on, and still is, remediation equipment and systems as our core business, equipment sales, rentals, and leases. You touched on it at the onset. We do a lot of landfill gas extraction and treatment. We build and fabricate gas extraction blowers and flares for flaring off methane gas. We're an ASME certified tank shop, so we design and build in-house 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 pound vessels that customers use for carbon, resin filtration. A lot of that is used for PFAS work.
Wow.
We have an online commerce store. So if you go to shop.prmfiltration.com, you'll see thousands of products that you can buy online. Fittings, valves, filters, blowers, pumps, electrical gear, switch gear, control gear, all kinds of things like that. Where do I see PFAS? Where do I see the industry going? So for the past, round numbers, right? 5 years, everyone's been talking PFAS. And the surface hasn't even been touched yet. Surface hasn't even been scratched yet. Yeah, there's some PFAS treatment going on right now, but not that much. And I see, really, in my opinion, you look 10, 20 years down the road from now, PFAS may very well be what BTEX and benzene was in the mid-'80s when I got into this industry. And what I mean by that is PFAS is the hot topic now. It'll be the hot topic for several years. But I'm already seeing all kinds of other contaminants that are quote-unquote emerging contaminants or recalcitrant that are just very difficult to treat by their nature. So who knows? PFAS is the big thing now. It was, maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, it was 1,4-dioxane. Before that, it was TCE. Before that, it was benzene. So I think PFAS is going to be here for a long, long time, but I guarantee you there's going to be other emerging recalcitrant contaminants that are going to be the topic of discussion, for sure.
I'm very excited. And we got time for one more question, and I usually like to end it with this, is, like I said, we have a whole diverse set of viewers. We have people in college, we have people who are experienced, but maybe you can talk more from the sales perspective. Any book that comes to the top of your head where it was really impactful in your life?
Yeah, absolutely, Evan. So the business coach that I mentioned a couple of times here, avid reader, the guy just read and read and read. And he said to us, for anybody that's in the business world, particularly in sales, I don't know if you can see it here, probably backwards. It's Earn the Right to Win, written by Tom Coughlin, who was an NFL coach, led the New York Giants to a Super Bowl win, football coach at Boston College for a number of years, Jacksonville Jaguars, and a former military guy, right? So the name of the book is Earn the Right to Win. And really the premise of the book is, you'll see this in some of my stuff on LinkedIn, PPE, plan, prepare, and execute. He's fanatical, crazy maniacal about planning and preparing. And the premise of the book is, look guys, going into a sales meeting, picking up the phone to make a sales call, if you plan and prepare for that event, you may not come out with a win, but you've earned the right to come out with a win because you did your due diligence. You planned, you did your preparation, and then you executed. And it's a great, great book. Really, really recommend it.
I love it. And I think off of that too, like, even if, and I've always believed in this, especially with sales and business, even if you don't win immediately, that doesn't mean you didn't win, because they may love the preparation you put into that. And
100%.
You may generate business a year down the road,
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I've always said that let's put it as an example, right? Before we wrap up, if I'm following up on a job and we're winning the work, that's great news. If we don't win the work, I always ask the question, Evan, best of success with the project. I want to know though, what should we have done or could we have done differently that would have led to a different outcome? And then you stop and listen, and you get so much feedback for lessons learned. Well, John, you missed the mark here, or you missed the mark there, that kind of stuff. So again, PPE, plan, prepare, and execute.
PPE, I love it. But I'm looking at the clock now, and I think that's all we got for today. But I just want to say, John, thanks for coming on. Guys,
Thank
what
you.
I'm going to do is in the description, I'm going to have John's LinkedIn. I'm going to have his company's website. I would definitely encourage you, check out his LinkedIn, see what he's posting, see what his company's doing. And, John, thanks again. This has been such a fun episode.
Likewise, Evan. Thank you very much for having me.
We're good.